Should the time ever come when Latin and Greek should be banished from our universities, and the study of Cicero and Demosthenes, of Homer and Virgil should be considered as unnecessary for the formation of a scholar, we should regard mankind as fast sinking into absolute barbarism, and the gloom of mental darkness as likely to increase until it should become universal.
Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, listeners, to Ad Nauseam episode 173. I'm down here in, what are we calling this? This is
Vomitorium Central.
I think that's where Central. It is. Our Delphi, our Parnassus here, down here in the bunker with my good friend, Dr. David C. Noe. I am, as always, Dr. Jeffrey T. Winkle. Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. With a continuation of last week's theme, I'm still feeling pensive.
Pensive?
Yeah, hear the trumpets, hear the pipers, 100 million angels singing, multitudes are marching to the big kettle drum. I'm feeling like Johnny Cash once again.
Johnny Cash. Oh,
that's right.
So have you been spinning that this week?
I have. Yeah, you know how a song gets stuck in your head?
Oh, yeah.
Like the earworm you talk about?
Mm-hmm.
And there's some songs I could listen to, and so I do, over and over.
Yeah.
Is that artistically weak? What do you think?
No, I think that's very human.
Okay,
right? Yeah, I think that's a sign of an effective, excellent song.
Really?
But the one you just quoted there, what song is that from?
The Man Comes Around.
The Man Comes Around. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I love Johnny Cash.
I do too.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So how are you doing, Jeff?
I'm feeling good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting a little bit of the winter blues.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
You know, the groundhog. I think we mentioned he saw a shadow. So we've got a few more weeks.
Punxsutawney Phil.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So it gets me a little bit down, but all told, I've had a good week of teaching. Everyone's healthy and happy at home, and so
that's fantastic.
I cannot complain. How are you feeling? You're doing good?
I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah,
you're gonna take some spring break somewhere? You're gonna go to warmer climes?
Not really. So my spring break doesn't align with my children's and my wife. So we are going to take a few days when their break comes on. We're going to go down to a place called Hocking Hills, Ohio.
Hocking Hills?
Yes, which is apparently
a lot of spitting and clearing of one's throat.
Exactly. Lots of just spitting, hawking up stuff. Right. Yeah.
So is Hocking Hills next to Phlegm Stream or something like that?
Right. All right. Actually, the cabin we rented is on Phlegm Stream.
Oh, so, interesting.
Yeah. No, it's a place that is apparently renowned for its kind of wild natural beauty, lots of hiking and sylvan goodness.
That'll be a good time. You'll do a lot of cooking once again.
Absolutely.
I understand. You'll probably read some true crime.
If I can, I'm in need of a new true crime book. Yeah, but that'd be great to bring along.
Right.
Yeah.
So Jeff, what are we talking about today?
Well,
and what's with that cold open?
Maybe we should start there.
Okay.
You read that cold open quote. What is that from?
Well, that is from page 97 of the wonderful book by Carl Richard, The Golden Age of the Classics in America.
Yes.
And if the listener read the description of this episode, its title, then she would know we're going back to this book to take on another chapter.
Yep.
Namely, chapter 3, the title of which is Pastoralism and Utilitarianism.
Yeah.
And the quote, is it's quite dramatic, right?
Yeah.
Saying that if people stop reading these authors, Cicero, Demosthenes, Virgil, Homer, the whole project will descend into universal barbarism.
Yes.
What do you think as a starting place?
I think as a people, as a culture, is that where we are right now?
Well, it could be, but the interesting thing about this quote is it was written, I don't know, in the 1820s,
yes.
Right? In fact, it was 1820 in particular. The quote comes from the Western Review of Cincinnati, which is replying to the famous Yale Report by President Jeremiah Day, which we're going to talk about.
We will talk about that, yeah.
1820, we are now 205 years removed from that.
Amazing.
And you go onto the highways and byways of Grand Rapids and you ask someone, hey, who's Cicero? Who's Demosthenes? The man on the street kind of Jay Leno thing?
Yeah.
what kind of response are you going to get?
I think you're getting a lot of blank stares.
I think so too.
Right. So, I mean, I have to admit, this was my favorite chapter of Richard so far.
Okay.
I found this absolutely fascinating.
It was riveting, wasn't it?
Right. I mean, so much in the first two chapters that we talked about, what I'm so struck by is how everything old is new again, right? And so this tension between the practicality of education versus kind of a more philosophical approach, and how do we balance them, and what is education for? These questions have been around for generations.
It hasn't changed at all.
No.
That's the shocking thing. Each generation believes, I guess, that they are for the first time grappling with some of these complicated questions.
Yeah.
No, not at all.
Not at all. Not at all.
It was stunning, really, as we went through it.
Yeah, and I'm again amazed too. Is I think one of the many ways in which the era that we're talking about here compared to ours is very different. Is how it seems like the role of the classics was such a central part of kind of the cultural dialogue. I mean, maybe it's skewed a little bit because maybe this was more just kind of those kind of breathing the more refined era of academia.
Could be.
Did your yeoman farmer know much about this? I don't know.
According to Thoreau and Emerson and all of the other luminaries that lived and moved in this time period, yes.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But I can't wait till we compare some of those individuals to Virgil and Horace.
Right.
That was some fine writing there.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, we don't exactly have a corde regendum, but we have a little bit of correspondence
we do.
That I think we ought to deal with here.
All right, so what is this correspondence and who is this from?
Yeah, so this is from a friend of mine. We'll call him Daniel because that's his name. Doleys, lives in Ohio. And he sets up for us this really interesting little note. He says, also, in the last AN episode about Erisichthon, right, 2 Ovidian vignettes, you guys did not mention how that story inspired C.S. Lewis in The Last Battle. The scene in the 2nd chapter where a dryad comes to King Tyrion and Jewel, I think that's the unicorn if I remember correctly, to tell them the trees are being cut down and dies in front of them is taken directly from the Metamorphoses.
My goodness.
Lewis was a huge lover of Ovid, and there's been a bunch of research on how the Metamorphoses influenced his writing.
Interesting. That I had no idea. I mean, I admit it's been.
Yeah.
I probably haven't read The Last Battle since I was 12.
That's a long time.
So I don't remember that scene, but that's fantastic.
Yeah, right? That's interesting, isn't it?
So if I can plug some of my own
please,
work,
please,
which makes me feel extra embarrassed for not getting this this reference. I once wrote a chapter in a book about classics and modern fantasy.
Well, it was published by Oxford University Press, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right, and it was about the possible influence of Apuleius on C.S. Lewis. So I love this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm glad that Daniel brought this to our attention.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Wasn't it specifically? I'm trying to remember. Was it the Voyage of the Dawn Treader?
It was. That was the kind of the sole focus, and some of the themes there struck me as quite Apuleian.
Right. So a long time ago, when we lived in Virginia, here is a narrative digression.
Yes.
A friend of a colleague of mine, Bob was his name. One of his children was a great fan of C.S. Lewis, but he seemed to believe that the 3rd book with the sea voyage was the Voyage of Don Cheadle. And I don't know where the actor.
Of course, yes.
I don't know. I think he was in the Marvel movies.
Yeah, he's done a bunch of stuff, but exactly, yeah.
And I said, "What was that, Caleb? The Voyage of Don Cheadle." I don't think that's. I don't think that was what Lewis was after.
I love it. I love it. Well, that would be always trying to keep in the back of my mind potential episodes.
I know you are.
We're talking about a kind of ancient Greco-Roman influence on C.S. Lewis would be great. It'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah. The Voyage of Don Cheadle, the Voyage of Chris Evans, and so on and so forth.
Right. Yeah.
So thanks, Daniel, for sending that in.
Indeed.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, let's get into it then.
Let's do
it. Carl Richard, The Golden Age of the Classics in America, 2009, published by Harvard. And we've been at this a little bit, haven't we?
We have. Yep.
And this is chapter 3.
Yep.
So you have an opening quote for us from the work itself?
Yeah, I think I'm pick something from the first page of chapter 3, where he writes, the vast majority of Americans at this time, he's talking about, were still farmers in the years before the Civil War. And though their agriculture was increasingly commercial, the pace and structure of farm life differed little from those of previous generations. Furthermore, as in all nearly past periods of commercial prosperity, the very surge in wealth created an anti-commercial backlash that relied heavily on the classics. John T. Kirkland, the president of Harvard, was not alone in 1818 when he expressed the wish that America might produce fruit of the mind, not just an unsanctified Carthaginian perishable prosperity.
Interesting.
Right.
That's fascinating.
How, it comes up a few times in this chapter about how the tension between what Roman represents and the barbarism of Carthage.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, it's the gentleman farmer.
Yeah.
The Romans viewed themselves as gentleman farmers, much like Thomas Jefferson.
Yes.
Against the mercantilist vision for America that Alexander Hamilton had.
Yeah.
Secretary of the Treasury.
Exactly.
Which was, labeled Carthaginian.
Yeah.
And it's really an interesting debate. I would suggest, that one of my favorite authors is Wendell Berry.
Oh yes, you're a huge fan, Dave.
I think that's part of what's being what's being replayed here.
Yeah,
is that those who have the means and those who have the not just the financial means but the kind of the spiritual intellectual means should cultivate the lifestyle of the gentleman farmer.
Yes,
40 acres and a mule. Indoor plumbing and things like that are corruptive of our better nature.
Right.
I mean, this is kind of what a lot of people with their, their granola sort of instinct. Boy, I'm alienating so many listeners. This is what they're after.
Yeah.
And there's nothing new about it. Here it is in this, in this chapter 200 years ago.
Exactly. It's part of the hippie movement, right?
Yeah.
You still hear lots of that kind of stuff today as kind of a response to kind of the overwhelming invasion of technology,
right?
Going Luddite in the other direction,
right?
It's all part of this. This is and this, of course, this extends back to, well, in this case, Virgil and Horace.
That's right.
And before that,
even all the way back to Hesiod.
Exactly.
Because Richard mentions the great Hesiod. So have you heard about the crunchy con movement?
I have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Would you consider yourself a crunchy conservative, a crunchy con?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, there's a lot of this I find sympathetic, right?
Okay.
As a response
how many chickens do you own?
I own 0 chickens.
You know that in the city of Grand Rapids, you can own, I think, up to 5 chickens. If you have the signed permission of all of your neighbors.
I have friends from church who have got a big coop in the backyard.
Wow.
Yep. But no, I'm sympathetic to pushbacks against kind of the hollowness and the empty promises of materialism.
Okay.
But, that kind of resulting in a retreat to the countryside, not so much. Beck and I talk about this, like when the boys are grown up and gone, of getting something, maybe more
back to your roots.
Yeah, well, Jennison?
Jennison used to be just, endless celery fields.
It did, right. Yeah.
Now it's mostly strip malls, but at one point, right? Jeff's talking about a western suburb of Grand Rapids.
Right.
And when you say Jennison around here, everybody knows what it's referring to.
I remember very distinctly in high school when it would get warm in the springtime, the teachers would open the windows and you could smell the rot of the onions from the muck fields that were just over the horizon. Right? No, not that, but finding a place with a little bit more space and land, but not becoming a gentleman farmer.
Okay.
So can I
get your own overalls, stick a straw in your mouth, get a hat.
Right. I know from previous conversations with you that there's aspects of this that irritate you.
Oh, tremendous.
Right.
There's aspects of everything that irritate me, as you well know.
But
there's also part of it that's appealing because I do have an authentically agrarian background.
You
right?
You grew up on a farm.
I did, a large one, right? And so when people say, "Yeah, I farm," I have been with my usual condescension a little dismissive.
Yeah.
So what kind of a farm do you have? Well, it's a hobby farm, they say. So you mean you got little plastic cows and little plastic horses? Yeah, because I don't know how to express
let me
it.
ask you this. Growing up on a farm, your parents, your dad, a farmer.
Right, still is.
Was that ever kind of part of the vibe that what you're doing was more noble?
No. That's why when I hear this kind of romanticization of agrarian life, I react to it, right? Because it's not ideal. It's ideal if you have the means, to do a little bit of hobby farming, and then you can go back and read literature, which is wonderful, like Virgil and Horace did.
Yeah.
But these guys were not involved, and nor do I think the individuals in the 19th century arguing about it were not involved in the real difficult, subsistence kind of work.
Right, exactly.
That it takes to make a living from the land, so to speak.
Right, and I think that's always been my sense in when Virgil and Horace addressed these kinds of things. I mean, we know from history that they had farms,
yes,
but they spent the vast majority of their lives in the city where the patronage was.
Right.
And so the idealizing of the country life that we see in the Georgics we're not meant to take that as a reflection of Virgil's day to day.
Right.
Right. It always struck me as much more of a pose.
Right. Yeah. If you said to Virgil, "Hey, you want to come and help me hoe my garden? Are you crazy?"
Right. Exactly.
I got 4 books of Homer to read.
Right.
So.
Well, especially in the Georgics, you read lines like he's saying, plow naked.
Right.
No thanks. I don't need your help. Right? I was trying to think of kind of modern corollary to this, and I was thinking. It reminded me of like Bruce Springsteen. So,
presenting himself in the pose of the average man.
Of the working man, right? He's the boss.
Okay.
Right? Or I was also thinking like John Mellencamp.
Yes.
Indiana farm boy. He kind of wore that persona on his sleeve.
Born in a small town, but isn't he the real deal? Or did he live in the Hollywood Hills?
Well, I think that if I had to pick between the boss and Mellencamp as who's the real, it's Mellencamp. I think he still has a house in Bloomington or whatever.
Okay.
I think he was kind of truer to his roots. But at the same thing, it was kind of the rock star posing as the everyday man, everyman. So, and I see some of that same kind of pose reflected in say Virgil's Georgics.
Yeah. Well, I think understandably we're getting way ahead of ourselves.
Are we?
Yeah, because we're talking about all of the. It's my fault. We're talking about all of the cash out of these different ideas before really explaining to the listener what's going on in this chapter.
Right.
So the quote that you read, the part that sticks out to me is, as in nearly all past periods of commercial prosperity, the very surge of wealth created an anti-commercial backlash.
Yes.
So that's the 2 themes in this chapter. Pastoralism, and then the response of utilitarianism.
Right. So as Britain starts to industrialize, this debate arises over what is education for.
Right.
It reminds me of the famous quote by Calvin Coolidge: "The business of America is business."
Right.
So should education be much more practical? What good is reading Virgil and Homer if you're not if it's not producing more goods at the plant?
Right.
Yeah.
Well put. So I'd like to pick up here on page 84 and read a quote again from Richard. Here he is defining classical pastoralism. Antebellum America was not the first prosperous society to experience a romantic backlash against excessive commercialism. Indeed, many of the classical pastoral writers to whom early Americans appealed were themselves denizens of commercial societies. Too often, modern historians interpret the pastoral ideal of the classical authors as a description of classical society rather than as a protest against the money-grubbing commerce that frequently pervaded it. So aside from Hesiod, who was hardly romantic about agriculture, emphasizing the hard work required to eke out a living on the rather barren soil of most of Greece. And I would just probably add that some of the memorable advice, Jeff, from Hesiod's Works and Days is don't urinate into the wind.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes.
The most famous classical pastoralists were all protesters against the urban commercial societies in which they lived.
Yeah.
Societies whose commercial prosperity ironically financed their romantic, nostalgic poetry about the rural life.
Right. Horace and Virgil were forced to kind of leave the city, and you've got to make your living on the farm. It would all fall apart.
Right.
It reminds me of like stories about hippie communes where all this great intentions of leaving the city and sharing and having all things in common implode almost immediately.
It's like any episode of Portlandia.
That's very true.
If you've seen one of those.
I have.
What does he say next about Theocritus, and who is Theocritus?
Theocritus, I'll just read this. Theocritus and the Alexandrian poets who first established pastoral poetry as a genre of Greek literature lived in the greatest commercial city of the Hellenistic age. Among the Romans, the leading pastoralists were Virgil and Horace, who owned farms, but who spent a good deal of time in Rome, the imperial center and seat of commerce for the whole Western world, and who received financial support from the Emperor Augustus through his advisor Maecenas.
Right.
So I like the way that Richard phrases it was a protest.
Right.
So I think that's more charitable than seeing this as just kind of a cynical pose.
Yes.
Right. So
I'm in favor of the notion of a protest, and to that extent, I'm not really upset about those who idealize the country life.
Yeah.
Because I understand its appeal, and in the 20th century, right, the United States in particular underwent an enormous shift in persons' employment. I'm not a sociologist. I can read history books, but around 1900, something like 98% of the American population was involved in production agriculture.
Huh, man.
But now it's less than 2%. So when I was a kid, one of my parents' friends had never, this lovely woman, she had never been on a farm, never experienced a farm life. And she was talking about flour, And so she asked my mom, so what is this with flour? What is this flour stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And my mom said, well, flour, where it comes from. And she said, it comes from the bag, right? And my mom said, no, it's ground wheat. It comes from wheat.
Yeah.
Right. So I think authentically, this dear woman did not know, right, that the white powdery stuff was once standing in the field
right.
as, amber waves of grain.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I'm under the impression that kind of detachment is not unusual.
No, I think that's very, very common. Was there any pressure on you to carry on the family business?
No, there was almost negative pressure.
Is that right?
In the sense that, I'd be told, you don't want to do this. This is a hard life. Go do something else.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Did your dad inherit the farm from his father, or?
No, it was through my mom's side that he kind of, through lots of hard work, he kind of leveraged his way into this lifestyle.
Yeah.
Because it skips a generation. So his father was raised on the farm. This would be my paternal grandfather. Mm-hmm. But then did not pursue a farming life. He kind of couldn't get away from it fast enough because it was just such an enormous amount of work.
Right.
But my dad was drawn to it. So.
Yeah.
How about agriculture in your side of the family?
Yeah, my dad grew up on a farm in northern Michigan too.
Okay.
But my sense that in talking to my grandfather while he was still with us, he couldn't get away from it fast enough.
Yeah.
And so as soon as his three kids grew up, he sold the farm and moved to the city.
Right.
I never got the sense that my grandfather romanticized that life, and my dad certainly had no interest in taking over that business.
Well, that's really what the last 100 years of American history, at least, demonstrate. That the vast majority of people prefer a non-agricultural lifestyle.
Yeah.
That's why 98% of them aren't doing it anymore.
Yeah.
So that's really, to me, quite telling.
Now, give me your take on this. Is that and kind of explain? Well, where does that idealization come from? My sense is that, going back to Hesiod, it's kind of this golden age idea. Is that's how the world began in a garden, and so this idea is that's where we're all kind of longing to go back to.
Yes,
like the famous song Woodstock. I've got to get myself back to the garden.
I didn't know that song.
Yeah,
that must not be Cash.
No, it's Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Oh, okay.
Right. But the idea that the garden, the farm, the field is by pursuing that lifestyle, you're closer to what God or the gods intended.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And this point is even made later in the chapter that a couple of the individuals who are talking about the ideal agricultural lifestyle say, look, this was man's first task was to till the garden, right? So there's a kind of priority given to that particular lifestyle. So at the bottom of 84, Richard says, among these city dwellers, referring to Cato the Elder and Virgil and Horace and Hesiod, he says, no theme was more ubiquitous than that of the superiority of the rural agricultural existence, a lifestyle that rested comfortably between the extremes of savage and sophisticated. So nobody wants to live, just kind of scraping along.
Right.
But if you can live in the countryside and you don't have to put up with the traffic and the noise and supposedly the moral degeneracy of urban life, that's the idea.
Yeah.
Then you've got it made.
Yes. It reminds me of that passage, I think it's from Seneca, where he's hearing all of the horrible things happening outside his window and just kind of all of the cacophony and horror of urban life.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I understand in Roman times, if you lived on the top floor of a tenement, right, you were in better shape because the garbage disposal was simply to chuck things out the window.
Exactly, right. So it wasn't raining past your flat, right?
Cantaloupe rind and, bits of chicken bone are coming down. Yeah. So I can understand that. But city life today, is quite different than in the past.
Indeed.
Do you want to read a little bit of that Georgics?
Yeah.
This is the famous 4-book poem of Virgil. I think we did an episode on Virgil, or two. Not on the Georgics yet. We did the Eclogues.
Eclogues,
right?
yeah.
Cowboy Up Verge.
Yep.
So this is from book 2. Could you read a bit of that?
Sure. How lucky the farmers are, wish they knew. The earth herself, most just, pours forth for them an easy living from the soil. I mean, right there. Right?
Yeah. Oh, it's so easy.
It's so easy. Far off from clashing weapons. Though the farmer has no mansion with proud portals which spits out a monster wave of morning visitors from every room, nor do his collars ghast at inlaid columns bright with tortoiseshell, or gold-embroidered clothes, or bronzes from Ephyra, nor in his house is plain white wool dyed with Assyrian poison, nor does he corrupt his olive oil with foreign spice. He has untroubled sleep, an honest life. Rich in all sorts of riches, with a vast estate, he has all the leisure to enjoy a cave, a natural pond, a valley where the air is cool, the mooing of cows is ever present, and to sleep beneath a tree is sweet. Wild animals abound for hunting, and young people grow up strong, hardworking, satisfied with poverty. Their gods are holy. Parents are revered. Surely when justice left the earth, she stayed last with these folks and left some tokens here.
Yeah.
It's great poetry.
It's beautiful, isn't
Yeah,
it? Who
is.
wouldn't want to live in a world like that?
Yeah.
But is that what it's really like, I guess, is the question.
Right. I like how he mentions all of these, accoutrements of the rich, which
Right.
perhaps maybe even Virgil, while he was composing this, was looking around his own room and saw them.
Oh, no doubt.
Right. The inlaid columns, the
Tortoise shell.
the Assyrian wool. Right. But in the context of the poem, these are all vanities.
Yes. So that's the idealistic view of country life. But here's what Richard says on 86. Like most worshippers of agriculture who succeeded them, the Roman pastoralists lived a life distant from the manual labor they extolled. Far less romantic about their lot, many of the farmers the pastoralists glorified preferred the freedom from, quote, noble toil that life in the city afforded. Hence Virgil's need to tell the farmers how lucky they were.
So all the farmers are trying to get off the field.
That's right. Yeah. Can I take an Uber? Do I have to ride a donkey once again?
Yeah, exactly.
So he goes on, thus it is not surprising that pastoralism was especially popular in Britain and the United States in the mid to late 18th century, precisely the time when both nations were undergoing commercial revolutions. An enthusiastic supporter of agriculture, King George III, was fond of his nickname Farmer George. Both Farmer Georges, the king and the rebel Washington, corresponded with Arthur Young, one of the high priests of the 18th century pastoral movement. Young declared, "Perhaps we might, without any great impropriety, call farming the reigning taste of the present times." Ironically, pastoralism also inspired many of the early classical economists whose ideas proved the eventual ruin of classical republicanism.
Do you know anything about? I was not familiar with Arthur Young.
Oh, no, I don't know that name.
Okay, yeah.
No, I know a little bit what he's talking about when he talks about the French physiocrats and laissez-faire. And I know a little bit about Adam Smith and David Ricardo, who come next, right? Mm-hmm. So David Ricardo is the world's most famous free trader, right? He says if you can get someone else to do the work better than you, then you have to have them do it, right?
Yeah.
This is why I don't have chickens. Because although I could get eggs from a chicken, and I have enough knowledge to do that, I'd have to do it for the fun,
yes,
not for the efficiency.
Exactly.
Because there's no way that I can get eggs out of a chicken in the same way that, the
factory farms.
Exactly.
Right.
And I don't feel bad about it, but a lot of people tell me that I should feel bad about it.
Right.
And I don't really understand that.
However, people tell you feel bad about it. It's not about the efficiency, right? It's the ideal.
Right. So if you want to go raise chickens, I'm happy with that. But it's hard for me to accept the idea that it's somehow better unless we're talking about just the joy that you take in the activity.
Right. I think it's worth also mentioning here. I mean, Richard's he alludes to it.
Sure.
But the time period we're talking about is smack dab in the middle of what we most people refer to as the Romantic era. Right?
Yes.
So this is already a cultural wave that's pushing back against the Enlightenment, right? Where the pendulum has swung away from kind of strict rational, all things in the universe can be described and explained through science, to a preference for the mystical.
Yes.
And I think what follows on the heels from that is, in terms of idealism, in terms of theology, mythology, there is this move from the city to the countryside. Where are you going to find a place that's God haunted? Mm-hmm. You're not going to find it downtown.
No,
you're going to find it out in the mountains.
Bus stop where the greyhounds coming by.
Right.
No.
Right. Exactly. And so it reminds me of Keats and Shelley, also kind of idealizing the countryside from London and from Rome.
Right.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. So at the bottom of page 87, Henry David Thoreau comes up. And could you read a little bit of that, please? His romanticizing of Greece?
Yeah. I thought this was interesting. When I was a high school student, forced to read Walden, right? And I don't remember being all that enthralled by it.
No.
But what I was...
It was because of the smell of the rotten onions wafting through the windows.
Didn't help.
No.
Didn't help, right. But I was unaware of Thoreau's knowledge of and connection to the classes. So I found this very interesting.
Okay.
So let me read this. A similar romanticism pervaded the pastoralism of Henry David Thoreau. In 1838, he wrote, "In imagination, I hie me to Greece as to enchanted ground. In his idealized image of ancient Greece, quote, no storms vex her coasts, no clouds encircle her Helicon or Olympus, no tempests sweep the peaceful Tempe or ruffle the bosom of the placid Aegean, but always the beams of the summer sun gleam along the entablature of the Acropolis, or are reflected through the mellow atmosphere from 1,000 consecrated groves and fountains. Always her sea-girt isles are dallying with their zephyr guests, and the low of kine is heard amongst the meads, and the landscape sleeps, valley and hill and woodland, a dreamy sleep. Each of her sons created a new heaven and a new earth for Greece." Well, it's a little much.
Is that how you've experienced Greece?
Well,
Have you been there in the summer?
I have. It's so brutal.
It's brutal. I like it. I've been there, I think, twice in August.
Right.
Never in the spring. It's always, for me, it's always been August or winter.
Yes. Yeah. Same here. For me, it's been winter or June.
Right.
And the 3 times that I have stood at the foot of Mount Olympus, I haven't had weather like Thoreau describes here.
I know. And when I've been up on the Acropolis, right? This what was this wonderful quote that you wrote? Something about that you read. I mean, the summer's gleam along the entablature of the Acropolis.
Yes.
I love that, but that's the moment I say, let's get back to the AC. And I can have a cold soda, right?
Right.
And enjoy some of the comforts of modern life.
Exactly. And if you're there in June or August, you're also kind of hemmed in on every side by gawking tourists.
1,000 fellow tourists.
Right.
So I don't know what to think of that.
Right.
But we're coming up here on the bottom of 88 at what many of our listeners will perhaps find the most interesting aspect of this chapter, I would say. And this part is entitled The Utilitarian Assault on the Classical Languages Requirement.
This is so interesting.
And as I was reading this last night, I thought, this is incredible.
Yeah.
Because again, 205 years later, nothing has changed.
No, we're having exactly the same debates today.
That's right.
All right. So this section begins with these words. As the Industrial Revolution advanced in the antebellum United States, utilitarian arguments against the requirement of Greek and Latin in the schools increased, though the arguments themselves were no different from those that had been put forward by Benjamin Franklin, Benjamin Rush, and Thomas Paine, and by others even before these. And the antebellum utilitarians suffered almost as complete a defeat as their predecessors had. Indeed, their defeat was caused, at least in part, by the romantic backlash against excessive commercialism that the Industrial Revolution itself unleashed.
That's interesting.
Right. So the move towards a practical education is part of this.
Right.
But it's framed by the utilitarians as like, well,
what's the use?
What's the use?
Exactly.
And we're in an era where going to college, the entrance exam or the entry requirements required a level of expertise in Greek and Latin.
That's right.
And in almost across the board.
That's right.
And so the utilitarians said, what's the point in all this?
Yeah. Later in the chapter, we learned that the Harvard entrance exam, right, was an 8-hour test on Greek and Latin. Wow. Entrance exam.
Man.
And I probably wouldn't have passed it. And I'd like to think that when it comes to Greek and Latin, I'm pretty accomplished. But I probably wouldn't have been admitted to the school because you had to do such incredible things just to get in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's remarkable. So on that same page, we have Jonathan Maxey. In 1811, Jonathan Maxey, president of South Carolina College, caused a firestorm by proposing a reduction in the amount of time college students spent on ancient texts. Maxey urged the replacement of the classics with math and science courses during the students' junior and senior years. Under Maxey's proposal, knowledge of Greek and Latin would still be required for admission to the college, and students would still receive instruction in the classical languages during their freshman year. But limited to that, and then they go to math and science.
Right. So, I mean, there's a lot in here. I just, my notes I made in the margin.
Sure.
You start to, as a teacher at a community college,
right,
that tension between traditional education or a trade school.
Right.
I know I have students who are getting their certification in HVAC, and they're still required to take a humanities course, right? And
how do you feel about that?
I like it.
Yeah.
Right? And,
do they like it?
Well, it's often when I have talked to students about that, they'll come and say, it was I was really annoyed that I had to do this. Just teach me how to do the job and I'll do the job.
Right.
But most students have come around and said, well, at the end of the day, I'm really glad I did this.
Yeah.
Right. I think their humanities requirement, there's hundreds of classes they could take to fulfill that. Right.
Yeah.
So, probably, way more on the menu than the time period that we're talking about. But that same idea is, well, why should I, if I'm going into this trade, why do I need to know this? We also see a shift towards what we would call STEM.
Right.
Let's get away from literature.
Well, but now it's STEAM.
STEAM. Well, yeah, nobody calls it STEAM.
Well, it's science, technology, engineering, art,
right,
and mathematics.
Again, I've seen that ideal. Nobody,
you're not going for
nobody says. I would love that.
Okay,
but nobody says STEAM.
Right.
But yeah, so they're again that kind of a focus on STEM.
Right.
Better to take some mathematics than to read Homer again.
I like the approach of Nassim Taleb, the economist who wrote The Black Swan, and he also wrote Skin in the Game. Mm-hmm. I read Skin in the Game. I didn't read the other one. But he says everybody should learn something new and useful.
Yeah.
He has in mind computer science.
Yeah.
And something old and useless. Like Latin. What could be older or more useless than Latin?
Yeah.
But to me, the arguments are strained when they say to your HVAC student, well, take a course in classical myth because it will make you better at HVACing.
Yes.
I don't buy that at all.
No.
That's a very weak approach.
Right.
Much better to say classical myth has nothing to do with being good at HVAC, but who cares?
Yes,
right?
exactly.
The color of your shirt or the taste of your food has nothing to do with your survival as a human being.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that the color of your shirt or the taste of your food are unimportant.
Right.
How much time do people devote to things that are purely aesthetic? It's unbelievable.
Exactly. And as you have often said when we've talked about this, that the fact that something is wondrous and beautiful,
right,
that's enough.
Yeah.
That's enough, right? I wanted to read this quote because I want your take on this, because I think this reflects on when we have talked about the purpose of education, or like a classical education.
Right. Now, do you want what the kids call a hot take?
Yes.
Which means unconsidered, unreflected, maybe not completely sober, but just shooting from the hip?
Well, I think that you're probably incapable of giving a hot take, right? Not on this. This topic.
Someday I'd like to give a hot take.
Right. I think you could maybe outside of maybe your kind of box of comfort.
Oh, I could.
Right. I look forward to it. But there's still on page 89. There's a quote here where the throwback to the utilitarians is often. Well, no, the classical, they are practical.
Right.
And so this is Johann Winckelmann's dictum, no relation, where he says, the only way in which we can become great is by imitating the ancients.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
I think that Winckelmann probably means, in terms of the only way that we as a society, the American experiment, which I think in the 1820s was still so brand new and people were so optimistic.
Yeah.
We're going to avoid all of the mistakes of the Europeans who are constantly killing each other over stupid things, right?
Yes.
This, I understand, was kind of the American rationale. And so Winckelmann means we can become great as a people together by imitating the ancients. I think that's what he means. And I would kind of grant the truth of that. Mm-hmm. But I think that the ancient definition of what it means to be great is not something that I'm really on board with anymore.
Like, are you talking about like the notion of like arete or?
Well, if by great you mean accomplishing great things, great works of art, great literature, great music, the things that make a society pleasant for people generally, I'm all in favor of that.
Yeah.
And so I like it that the Lincoln Memorial looks like a Greek temple.
Yeah.
I like it that the Washington Monument is an Egyptian obelisk.
Yeah.
But the greatness of those things, as I get older and as I hopefully grow into my Christian identity, the greatness of those things has dimmed somewhat.
Yeah.
I'm just not as allured by those things as I once was. Right. So the first time I walked into the Lincoln Memorial, I was awestruck.
Yeah.
And my breath was taken away. I still think it's a beautiful building, but I don't think I would have the same kind of emotional response that I once had. And I think it's mostly just getting older.
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, we were just talking, Romanticism and Romantic poets. It puts me in the mind of Shelley's Ozymandias, right, where he comes across the legs of a statue,
right?
And the quote is there is, look upon my my great works and shudder.
Right.
And the message is, all of this is all great things will crumble to ruin. I took from like where I think I like where Winckelmann is going.
Yes.
Is this idea? I think the critique of utilitarianism is, okay, we're producing all of these new goods and these wonderful machines, but if it's unmoored from purpose and meaning,
right,
then it's all meaningless. So maybe the imitation of the ancients, the study of the ancients, can provide some kind of grounding of what is it all for?
Yes.
Right. It's the why that accompanies the what.
I'm with you. Yeah. And speaking of Ozymandias, it's time for the ads.
Okay. This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Hackett Publishing. Hackett Publishing, they've been in business for as long as I've been alive, 54 years.
The half-century mark.
Yes, incredible. And what we love about these guys is that they are one of these companies that is not just keeping the flame of the classics alive, but doing it in a way that is affordable, that's attractive, and with just a wide range of offerings. I can't think of another publisher that does this as well as these guys.
Yeah, there's a quote in the chapter somewhere about, I don't remember who it was, maybe we'll get to it, but the person says, we live in an amazing time when Plutarch and Plato and the Apostle Paul are rolling off the presses at prices people can afford.
Yes.
It's like he was describing Hackett.
Exactly, right. So I use these books in my classes. I've got them on my shelves. Dave, I know you do too. Always kind of innovative, interesting cover art, great translations. They do multiple translations of the same work by different authors, so you can get a wide a range of approaches to these things.
That's right.
And affordable.
Right.
My students who are always scraping money together and having difficulty making ends meet sometimes, and so when they see that a textbook that I'm asking you to buy is under $10, it's fantastic.
So your exemplar, the HVAC student, right?
Yeah.
Who wants to make an honest and good career fixing people's heating and cooling, which needs to be done.
Yeah.
He signs up for your course. And then finds out that the book costs $200 if he wants to read Homer?
Yeah, not if it's from Hackett.
That's right.
Exactly right. So, hey, listeners, do yourself a favor. Check out their wide offerings. Go to hackettpublishing.com, HACKETT publishing.com. Search around. It's not just classics. They have stuff from all corners of different history, philosophy, religion.
That's right.
Great stuff. Find the books you want, put them in the grocery basket. And Dave, what's the coupon code?
Yeah, so the coupon code is AN, as in ad nauseum, and then the current year, which is 2025.
It is.
For at least about 10 more months.
That's right.
And what will that get them, Jeff?
2 amazing things that will get them 20% off your entire order and free shipping.
Check it out. This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by Mark Helweg and the great people at Ratio Coffee. Just this week, Jeff, guess who popped up in my newsfeed?
I believe it was Mr. Helweg himself.
It was Mark Helweg, who was interviewed by Entrepreneur Magazine.
Fantastic.
I have never been. Have you ever been interviewed by Entrepreneur?
No.
I can't even spell the word. But Mark was, and why is that?
Well, because he makes these amazing machines, and he's a great entrepreneur.
That's right.
That's why. And so let me just read. This is from an article and / interview with Mark just from last month. And he says, coffee is a beautiful ritual. It shouldn't be that complicated, nor should your coffee at home lack the nuance and depth that you can get at a cafe. I enjoy receiving notes from our customers after they set up their ratio machine and brewed a few batches. Our products aren't designed for everyone. They're designed for people who love beauty, quality, and simplicity.
Yeah, it's kind of like our podcast, right?
Beauty, quality, and simplicity?
No. Oh, it's not designed for everyone.
No,
I mean,
true.
In fact, it may not be designed for anyone, so far as I know. But this coffee machine, it hits the mark. So I brewed up a pot this morning. It was delicious in my ratio 4.
Yes.
This is the one that takes up less countertop real estate and is at a more affordable price point.
Yep.
You've been through the 6, which you love.
I did.
You're with the 8 now at home, right?
8 now at home. So I too have brewed up a big pot for my wife and myself this morning. It was great. And when I got into work this morning, just as a boost before I went off to class,
nice.
I used my ratio 4.
Wow. Yep. And it's a complicated sort of system, right? That requires a semaphore and a team of individuals, like pulling your coffee machine into the pit at the drag racing or the Formula One kind of spot.
You would think with coffee that good, but actually it's quite the opposite. If you remember what I just read, it's simplicity.
Okay.
That is a key part of the ratio design and purpose.
How many buttons does one need to push in order to send away the brackish tang?
There's just one button.
Oh.
Yeah, and it goes through your 3 stages. You got the bloom, you got the brew, and then it's ready to go.
That's incredible.
Fantastic. Yep.
So let's say that our listeners, they want 2 things.
Yep.
They think this podcast deserves a little support.
Indeed.
And then they think, I want to up my coffee game.
Yeah.
What should they do?
They should go to ratiocoffee.com/ad nauseum. Don't forget the V in there. And Dave, what will they find when they go to that link?
Well, they will find that they need to put in a coupon code.
Mm-hmm.
And the coupon code goes like this. It's AN ratio 2025. That's ANRATIO 2025. And this will get them $20 off any ratio machine at checkout.
So, listeners, if coffee is a beautiful ritual for you,
yes,
check this out. If you want to up your coffee game,
that's right.
Don't hesitate. You will not regret it.
Yes, get the quality, get the simplicity. Remember this code AN ratio 2025 at ratiocoffee.com/ad nauseum. All right, Jeff, so we're back into it, and take us on in this wonderful chapter.
Sure. So we're in the middle again talking about the utilitarian critique and pushback against
the attack right.
against Greek and Latin requirements. And this is from page 90. In 1830, Henry Vetthake, who taught mathematics and philosophy at Princeton, contended that the traditional requirement of Greek and Latin must give way to an elective system better suited to the needs of modern society. Vetthake claimed that while it had been necessary some 2-3 centuries ago to study Latin for scientific information, most scientists now wrote in their own vernacular language. And everything, here, direct quote, everything which antiquity has left us worth the perusal had been translated into English. So I remember this too when I was in grad school and meeting some other people. And I remember there was this guy that was getting a degree in chemistry.
Right.
And he was kind of poo-pooing my choice of vocation. And he was saying, what's the point? Hasn't everything already been translated into English? Like, why bother with the language? You can just read a translation. It's the same thing.
No, it's not the same thing.
It's not the same thing.
It's like kissing someone through a window pane.
Ooh, okay. Yes. Right.
You like that metaphor?
I do, yeah.
I don't ever, kiss my wife through a window pane. It's similar in some ways, but it's not the same.
Not the same.
Right.
Exactly.
I don't think that's working blue.
No, not at all.
Listener can make what they want of it.
Right.
But nothing has changed because there still is this endless need to justify what I take to be primarily an aesthetic choice.
Yeah.
I like it because it's beautiful.
Exactly.
People don't spend this much time justifying their listening to music, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But Richard goes on, right, with the attack on the classical languages, the assault, and he gives us this at the bottom of page 91. So, Jeff, could you read this? This is from the Southern Literary Messenger, 1842.
Yes, which Richard says often published articles regarding classical subjects and published this particular satiric attack, which went something like this, or exactly like this. Of Latin and Greek, 2 ancient and barbarous tongues, the vernacular of savages now extinct, a fossil Choctaw, the study of which was introduced to the West through the influence of monks and others belonging to the anti-recuperative sect who attempt to stifle the energies of mind. Use, said to be the reading of a blind beggarman's songs and some miserable apologies for plays where certain choruses supply the place of present stage trick and pantomime. The real use, to make a show in speeches by quoting these tongues, a capital trick when you balk or oppose by an antagonist argument. So basically saying that the only use is to sound clever,
yes,
and to have a retort to try to one up somebody else. That's the I mean, it's satire, right? But that's the idea.
So one more salvo in the assault, the utilitarian assault on the requirement of Greek and Latin, before we go on to the classical counterattack. So this is from the bottom of page 93, and here Richard is talking about the very famous educational reformer Horace Mann. So Horace Mann implied that the scientific and technological revolutions of the immediate past had diminished the relevance of the ancients. Mann claimed, quote, "In no respect is the contrast or disparity between the ancient and modern times more remarkable than in their ignorance of and our acquaintance with the natural sciences. Following Pythagoras were Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle among the Greeks, and Quintilian among the Romans. Great men indeed, but with not enough great men around them to correct their errors. And hence it may be questioned whether the authority of their names has not propagated, through succeeding times, more of error than of truth."
Yeah.
And I like what he says here at the bottom. Furthermore, Mann asked, this is Horace Mann, concerning the ancients, quote, "Why was it that they built the Parthenon and the Colosseum, before they knew how to construct a comfortable, healthful dwelling house. Has that thought ever occurred to you, Jeff?
No.
I never get to the Parthenon and think, why couldn't the Romans build a Winnebago? Is that what you think?
Not at all.
No, I don't look at the Colosseum and say, that's beautiful, but where's the hot tub? Where's the jacuzzi?
Right.
I don't understand really the point.
I don't even think man is correct here.
I don't understand. No. Then he says, why did they construct the Roman aqueducts before they constructed a sawmill?
Did they?
Well, maybe it's because they needed water more than they needed IKEA furniture. I don't know. Why did they achieve the noblest models in eloquence poetry and in the drama before they invented movable type? That seems kind of absurd.
This is absurd. These questions are going nowhere.
Right. So you look back at a culture, and instead of being amazed at what they accomplished, you say, why didn't they accomplish the things that we now consider the most important?
Right. Yeah.
So sure, they built the Hagia Sophia, but where was the iPhone 12, right?
Right.
I don't understand the point of that argument.
I don't either. I mean, the quote that you read before that, I understand what man is saying. I mean, one of the the famous bits from talking about the medieval era into the Renaissance is that Aristotle was king, right? And you to go against Aristotle, I mean, the most famous is his earth-centrism.
Right, it's geocentrism.
Geocentrism, that's what I meant. As the idea, Aristotle had this wrong, and they're clinging to Aristotle just because he's an authority from the past. Mm-hmm. Why shouldn't we abandon this altogether? What else are we missing? That's legit,
maybe,
to a degree.
Although I've been reading this fellow recently, Edward Fazer, who's a Thomist philosopher, brilliant guy. Mm-hmm. In fact, he has plugged our podcast for us a little bit.
Oh, nice.
A very nice guy. He wrote a book called Aristotle's Revenge, which is, maybe we'll have him on the show sometime, about the resurgence in Aristotelian metaphysics. So, I mean, the guy was right about nearly everything.
Right.
He's wrong about one little thing.
Right.
And so, Bacon, they just throw over the whole thing.
Yes, right, exactly. So I think buried in there,
sure,
these are legitimate questions that should be
absolutely
asked, right? You don't blindly, Richard talks about this, is that the kind of the reverence of Greco-Roman antiquity often is a reverence simply because it's old.
Right.
And there has to be more to it than that.
I agree.
Yeah.
At the top of page 94, we have this last little bit from man, and then we get the classical counterattack. He says, Richard says, the failure of the ancients to educate the masses through the type of public education that Horace Mann sought for America was the root cause of their inability to produce the technology that the Industrial Revolution was now using to improve lives.
Yeah.
So I guess Horace Mann's argument is, if only the Romans and the Greeks had had universal public schooling, they would have invented sawmills and trailer homes and jacuzzis.
Yes.
Chainsaws.
Right.
I don't really buy it.
Yeah, I don't really buy it either.
All right, so you ready for the classical counterattack?
Yes. Yeah. Shall I? Let me.
Please.
I'll start this section up. Responding with fury to nearly every utilitarian assault, the defenders of the classics achieved a victory that could hardly have been more complete. In 1827, 2 years after the Connecticut legislature, under the leadership of State Senator Noyes Darling, I can't make up his mind. Right?
Nice.
Requested that Yale abolish its Greek and Latin entrance requirement in favor of modern languages the legislature considered more useful to a modern economy. The university authorized a committee to study the possibility of curriculum change. All right, so now we're starting to see these critiques finding their way into the top universities,
right,
and possibly making some big changes.
How many times have you been asked the question, Professor Winkle, should I take Spanish or Latin?
Yes, right, yeah.
I even had this experience. I don't know if I've told you this before, but it was when I was still at the institution where we both worked.
Yes.
I think it was a few years before my time there ended, so about 2017. Mm-hmm. During the freshman student orientation, I met a brilliant young woman from Ann Arbor, and Alexa was her name. Mm-hmm. Excellent student. And she and her mom were there, and she said, "Yeah, I'd like to take Latin." I said, "Great, Alexa! I can't wait to see you in class." Right? She said, "Because I'm really interested in Latin." I said, "That's wonderful." So, first day of class, no Alexa. And I was, what's going on? So I emailed her and I said, "Alexa, could you stop by my office and, let me know what's going on?" She did. And I said, "So Alexa, how come you're not in Latin? You said you really wanted to take it." She said, "Well, I went to my advisor and my advisor said, no, you shouldn't take Latin. You should take Spanish." So she put me in Spanish. I said, "Against your will?" "Yeah." I said, "Well, go back to her and say, put me in Latin.
Yeah.
So she did, and then this young woman went on to be the tutor for the classics department because she was such an excellent Latinist.
Wow.
So it's along those same lines. Other people arbitrarily making, I think, an aesthetic choice.
Yeah.
It's like me telling people, no, don't listen to jazz, right? You should only listen to classical music because I think it's better.
Right. Yeah. That advisor, it really irritates me.
Oh yeah, I'm shaking my fist.
Exactly, right.
Shaking my fist.
Yeah. So, Dave, we got to talk about this famous Yale report,
Yes.
which is Richard's presents as kind of a watershed moment in this debate, in
So
academia.
It was put together by two guys, right?
Yep.
The president Jeremiah Day, and then who was the other fellow?
Classics professor James Luce Kingsley.
Yeah. So in 1828, they issued the Yale report.
Mm-hmm.
What was the famous report that was given for the assassination of JFK?
Oh, that was the Warren Commission.
The Warren Commission.
Yes.
So similar bombshell kind of thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So tell us about the Yale report.
All right. So here, reading directly from Richard's. In his section of the report, Day, who was also professor of mathematics and natural philosophy, asked, "Is a man to have no other object than to attain a living by professional pursuits? Has he not duties to perform to his fellow citizens, to his country, duties which require various and extensive intellectual furniture?" This is what you were saying.
Yes.
Is that life is so much more
Right.
than what you crank out to pay the bills, right?
Although I would say, and I can understand why he would do this, I would say there is a little bit of utilitarianism in this as well, in the sense that study classics to be a better citizen.
Yeah.
That's okay with me, but it's, for me, not the main reason.
The main reason, yeah. No, I'm
because
with you.
it's still kind of a means to an end. Study the classics because you want to. What's wrong with that?
Exactly.
Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. And so then Richards picks it up here. While the classics were vital to the moral and political education of the citizenry and could be taught only in schools, the mercantile, mechanical, and agricultural trades could be taught well only at the sites where they were practiced. Day wrote, "As in our primary schools, reading and writing and arithmetic are taught to all, however different their prospects. So in a college, all should be instructed in those branches of knowledge, of which no one destined to the higher walks of life ought to be ignorant. Merchants, manufacturers, and farmers, as well as professional gentlemen, take their place in our public councils. A thorough education ought therefore to be extended to all these classes." So there's a universal benefit for
Right.
everybody.
To have some knowledge of the humanities, you
Yes,
might say.
exactly.
Specifically Greek and Latin, but we could generalize. So,
Yeah.
so your HVAC friend,
Yeah.
right, this young man who's taken your classical myth course, for example, I guess Day's argument is someday that individual will be called to some post of public service.
Yeah.
He'll have to vote. He might serve on the school board. He might run for drain commissioner or something like that.
Yes.
In order to fulfill those functions well, he has to know more than HVACing.
Yes.
He's got to know something about what it means to be human and what it means to read literature.
Right.
Do you buy that kind of argument?
I broadly speaking, I do.
Okay.
Right? Especially when it's framed against that kind of a purely practical education is geared towards materialist ends. That has to be, in my mind, counterbalanced by something more lofty.
Right.
So that you were talking about, the Aristotle's Revenge.
Right.
There has to be some kind of metaphysical counterbalance to that.
Yes. To the materialism.
To the materialism. Yeah.
Right.
To the physical. Yeah.
I think that's largely what's missing today.
Indeed. And that comes up a lot. I teach a class on world religions, and a recurring theme as you kind of go through Hinduism, Sikhism, Buddhism,
Right.
Judaism, Christianity, Islam, is that a deep suspicion and wariness about the material world and its seductions. It's almost a universal metaphysical pushback against that.
Do you remember the days of, I'm sure you do, you remember the days of film cameras, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And you probably remember the days of the Polaroid.
Yes, I do.
So the Polaroid has made a comeback. But I also recently learned, Jeff, that there's an app you can install on your phone so that when you take a picture of something, right, you take a photo, it makes you wait for like an hour before you can see it.
Are you serious?
Yes. I had the same reaction. So that it simulates the idea of a Polaroid, or it compels you artificially to wait for the film to develop.
Interesting.
And I guess a lot of young people are using this particular app. I don't remember the name of it. But I asked, why would you do this? Well, because it's kind of nice to be like it was in the old days,
right.
where you have to, before you take the photo, before you see the photo, you have to wait a little bit.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me. But
Yeah.
It's very appealing.
It does sound a little crazy to me, but maybe a corollary to that I'm more sympathetic with is kind of the people who collect vinyl.
Okay.
Right? That's kind of a subculture. I get that of kind of having the physical product in your hand and kind of taking a chance on something, bringing it home,
right.
opening it up and putting it on. The waiting part, right?
Well, I predict this is going to happen with AI, that maybe AI can get to the place where it can translate Latin okay and maybe Greek. I think it's close to being able to do it with fair accuracy. Mm-hmm. But there will be a counter movement where people will say, I don't care if it can be done quickly. I enjoy the slower process, and I'm going to do it for that reason.
Yeah.
And that's great.
Yeah.
I have no objection to that.
No, I like that idea. I'm waiting for kind of that pendulum swing,
right.
In lots of different areas of life. I mean, sometimes I feel like it's coming, and others
it's going to be a while still.
I'm not so sure.
But the Yale Report had a lot of success.
It did.
If we look at the bottom of 96, for example, he talks about this fellow Albert Gallatin. And Albert Gallatin was one of the fellows leading the assault on the Greek and Latin requirement. Right. He says, Albert Gallatin felt compelled to resign from New York University Council when he failed to persuade his colleagues to make the study of the classics optional. Even Yale's chief rival, Harvard, demonstrated its agreement by dramatically increasing its classical admissions requirements in the 1830s and 1840s. By 1850, the Harvard qualifying examination lasted 8 hours.
Sheesh.
Harvard President Josiah Quincy believed that the classics provided, quote, the sure and solid foundation on which you may, in afterlife, build whatsoever intellectual frame you will. He responded to an appeal by William Ellery Channing to make Harvard more popular by declaring, let there be at least one institution in the country, the criterion of whose worth and merit shall be measured by something other than the number of its polls. Western Reserve and Illinois College both proclaimed themselves the Yale of the West. The first catalog of Beloit College on the Wisconsin frontier proudly announced a classical curriculum, quote, drawn up exactly on the Yale plan. As a trustee of the College of California, Jeremiah Days, that's the president of Yale, his son Sherman, later succeeded in removing the college's Spanish language requirement and reducing its French requirement on behalf of the classical languages. That's never happened in our lifetime.
No, never. and kind of reading this story, I would say, really?
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
It swung back that way?
Yeah, it's startling. I've always tried to make nice with the modern languages. I have nothing against them.
Right.
In fact, I've encouraged people to take them. Right?
Yeah.
And people, when they ask me, should I take Latin or Spanish? My response is, take them both.
Yeah.
What's the big rush?
Right.
Can't you do more than one thing? You know? They usually respond, with the understandable, well, time and money. Well, okay, I understand that. Well, then pick whichever one you want and then do the other one when you have the chance.
Yeah. I mean, the modern university has devalued all languages.
You're right.
I mean, so many students, you can get your requirement out of the way in high school.
Oh, yeah.
The universities don't value any language.
Yeah, and speaking of carping, when we were at the former institution, there was a movement to count computer science
as its own language.
As its own language, a programming language, which it is a programming language, but I mean, it is a language.
Yeah.
But come on, right? We're not talking about the same thing.
Right.
They're clearly different.
Exactly. So yeah, it's on the heels of what you were just writing that we get around to the quote that you read at the very beginning of the episode.
That's right. Jeff, you want to bring the Romanticists back into the conversation?
Yeah.
We talked about Thoreau previously. Now we have Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Right. So okay, we're getting towards the ends of things. There's way too much of this chapter to cover.
Definitely.
But, here on page 100.
Okay.
Ralph Waldo Emerson agreed with Thoreau. He stated his educational philosophy, quote, "It is better to teach the child arithmetic and Latin grammar than geography or rhetoric or moral philosophy, because these first require an exactitude of performance in the pupil. He can very easily learn anything which is important to him, now that the power to learn is secured. Out of this valid stock, choose the validest boy, and in the flower of this strength open to him the whole Dorian and Attic beauty, and the preceding ripeness of the same in Italy. Give him the very best of this classic beverage. He shall travel to Florence and Rome in his early manhood." Emerson Richard writes, might well have been referring to his own education.
Interesting.
So, I mean, there's an argument too embedded in that I've heard an argument for learning Latin is that it teaches you to be precise.
Right.
And there's also an argument here, I think just for time we had to skip over it, talking about the teaching of Latin leads to a much better understanding of English than just the sole study of English. That was true for me.
Oh, for sure.
Without a doubt. I did not understand English grammar until I understood it through the lens of Latin.
Right. Yeah. Well, and this just proves that speaking a language and reading it are very different experiences.
Exactly.
Because anyone can learn to speak English to a very high degree, but understanding the why behind it is quite a different animal.
Indeed.
So the rest of the chapter develops and expands on this notion of the backlash against commercialization and industrialization, and really the superb success of the classical languages in defeating the opponents.
Yeah. I thought maybe a good way to end is the very last sentence in the chapter.
I agree. On page 104 here,
Yes.
Maybe a little bit more than the last sentence. Maybe you could give a bit of that paragraph because it's so illuminating.
Yeah. All right. Antebellum critics of the classical languages requirement in the schools presented the same utilitarian arguments that would-be reformers had presented in the days of the founders, received the same rebukes for their heresy, and suffered the same defeat. From the beginning, Americans had been a pragmatic and commercial people, but one who had simultaneously harbored a reverence for tradition, both Christian and classical, and who had seen in these theistic and humanistic traditions a crucial means of moderating their own penchant for utilitarianism and materialism. Like nearly all the founders, most antebellum Americans assumed that they should study only what was useful, but to find usefulness broadly.
Interesting.
That's great.
Richard really knows how to pull all of the threads together at the end, doesn't he?
Yes, I'm really enjoying this book more and more as we get into it. Like I said, this is my favorite chapter so far.
Well, and the next time that we return to Richard, and there may be some other things in between, we go on to chapter 4, which is nationalism. Now, there is a topic that's much in the air these days.
Indeed. But we've got to get out of here, David.
Yes, we do. And we got to get out of here because some folks are trying to get in.
Yes. Is it Doge?
It is Doge. Do you know about Doge?
Are we talking about the Department of Government Efficiency?
No.
What is this?
I'm talking about Dave's optimistic Greek experience.
They're outside the door?
Yeah.
This is your experience?
That's right.
Okay.
My own Doge department.
Gotcha.
Dave's optimistic Greek experience.
That sounds exciting.
People who want to learn Greek, and I can help them.
And how would they go about doing that, Dave?
Well, they need to go to latinperdiem.com. Now you might be saying, wait. You said Greek, but now you're sending me to a Latin website? Well, yes, it's the one-stop shopping. Go to latinperdiem.com, a completely redesigned website. Check out my Latin courses, my Greek courses known as Moss Method. I can take you from
neophyte to erudite.
That's right. When it comes to Greek, you can start from little or nothing and get a very high level. Push back, I would say, against the crass commercialization and utilitarianism of the American educational landscape.
Indeed.
Grow your own chickens. Hatch your own Greek eggs. Not because it's going to make you richer or a better person, but just because you might enjoy it.
Indeed. Yes.
So if you go there, I have a coupon code for you. And the coupon code is 5ALIVE. That is the number 5 and then alive.
Yes.
Do you remember a movie in the 1980s, Jeff? Short Circuit?
I do remember that. Yeah.
Do you remember the general plot?
No, it's been years.
Okay, it was a robot who took on some kind of character. It was Johnny, I think was his name.
Okay.
And his catchphrase was number 5 alive.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that now?
That's coming back. That's right.
Yeah, so the coupon code is 5ALIVE, number 5, ALIVE. You'll get 5% off any of my courses. You can take one of the master classes on Cicero, Calvin, Erasmus, Theodore Beza. If you want to start from scratch, we have the Lingua Latina per se Illustrata, and of course, all of the Greek offerings. Please check that out. I don't think you will regret it.
Fantastic. And how about this contest we have for the ratio 4? So
we do have a contest.
So if you want to get your name, your hat in the ring for this, write to Dave at adnauseam.com. Don't forget that V. And this is the secret word, quatuor.
Quatuor. Can you spell that for them, Jeff?
That is QUATTUOR.
And that will put them in the drawing for
a brand new ratio 4.
Yes, which is going to happen on March 26th.
Okay, yeah.
So we'll put all of your names into a hat, and then we'll have some international powerhouse accounting firm like Deloitte and Touche, and they will pull a name out of the hat, and then you will be the winner of a ratio 4.
Yes, indeed. Hey, we got some people to thank. As always, Mishka, our wonderful engineer, doing this in record time and making us sound so much better than we actually do in person. Scott Vinzen, Ken Tamplin, they're the guys responsible for the music that you hear throughout the episode, the bumper music, that wonderful arpeggiated guitar, which makes me so envious and makes me want to give up playing guitar altogether.
Can't you do that, Jeff?
No, I can fake it, but those guys are the real deal.
Yes.
And Dave, if they want to get in touch with you, I believe dave@idnauseum.com is the email address.
That's right.
So if they got a complaint that you want to shout out, you got an idea,
we'd love to hear from you.
We would love to hear from you. You can also write to me.
Jeff@idnauseum.com.
Yep.
Don't forget the V in nauseum. Jeff would like to hear from you too, because he works hard on these. He does a good job. He's feeling a little smarchy.
Yeah, it's very smarchy. I need some. I would love to hear from you during Smarch.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think next week we're going to have this wonderful British scholar, Peter Saris, talking to us about Justinian. So that promises to be a very exciting episode.
Yes.
And Jeff, I believe that you have our gustatory parting shot this week?
Yeah, this comes from just my family. We were kind of teasing.
Oh, really?
Teasing my middle son, who went through a long period when he was younger, kind of talking in caveman style.
Oh, really?
He was trying to kind of wrestle his way through English usage. And he would...
He was doing this on purpose, or it was just fun?
We're not exactly sure. He's always been kind of a jokester.
Okay.
But he would often kind of, if he wanted something to eat, he would burst into our room and just announce to us, "Me hungry." That's all I got for you this week.
Me hungry. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.